What are East Boston's risks from coastal flooding both today and in the future? This is the focus of Coastal Resilience Solutions for East Boston Phase 2, a planning effort led by Climate Ready Boston. This video shares an overview of the potential coastal flood risks facing East Boston due to climate change. It shows what these risks look like now and how they might change if we don't take any action. When you picture coastal flooding, what comes to mind? Maybe it's a stormy day where waves come up over the shoreline and fill our streets and T stations with water, much like what we saw during the winter storms of 2018. This flooding includes both waves and storm surge, the elevated ocean levels that we experience during a nor'easter or a hurricane. But there is another type of flooding which can happen even on a sunny day, called tidal flooding. While this type of coastal flood hazard is less severe than storm surges, it still poses risks to our communities. Tidal flooding already happens in Boston during annual high tides, or king tides, in some locations. For example, you may have seen pictures from Long Wharf, which floods a couple of times a year. Coastal flooding is a result of sea level rise, which has been caused by climate change. Sea level rise has already had an impact on our communities. Over the last 100 years, sea levels have risen by nearly a foot in Boston Harbor, which has led to increased flooding every year. Over the next 50 years, it is expected to rise by another 40 inches. That's almost 4 feet. Sea level rise will result in higher tides and more frequent flooding during sunny day conditions. It will also lead to higher and more destructive storm surges and larger waves. This means that if we do nothing about it, we can expect floods to be deeper and reach further into our communities from the coast over the next 50 years. So what does coastal flooding mean for East Boston? Let's start by taking a look at the flooding risk today. Here is East Boston. The project study area is shown in the dark dashed line. Now let's take a closer look at the risk of flooding. The red arrows on the map indicate potential flood entry points. These are the places where coastal flooding can more easily flow onto dry land from low-lying areas. As you can see, there are quite a few across the waterfront. These flood entry points are the areas we really want to pay attention to. If they can be blocked, we can reduce the risk of flooding to our communities. Later on, you'll see how these flood entry points can grow over time. What areas would be at risk of flooding from coastal storms? First, it's helpful to think of flood risk like the lottery, or rolling dice. While the odds of flooding vary depending on storm types, the overall odds of flooding will increase every year due to climate change. Now let's take a look at 3 different flooding scenarios. Each one shows the impact of flooding from increasingly severe storm types. First, severe winter storms or nor'easters. Flooding from this storm type has about a 1 in 10 chance of occurring in any year. The areas in blue indicate the places that would experience flooding. This includes primarily the Belle Isle Marsh, with limited shoreline flooding around other parts of East Boston. Second, a more severe winter storm, similar to Winter Storm Riley in 2018 or the blizzard of 1978. Flooding from this storm type has about a 1 in 100 chance of occurring in any given year. A 1% chance of flood occurring in any year may not sound like a lot, but these add up over time. For example, within a 30-year mortgage, a house in this area would have a 1 in 4 chance of experiencing this flood. This storm could expand flooding along Bennington Street, east of Suffolk Downs, and along some parts of Chelsea Creek. Third, an even more intense storm. A storm this severe has only a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening in any year. However, when it does occur, it would cause significant damage and disruption. In this coastal storm, flooding expands a little further inland. If we do nothing to protect the neighborhood from coastal flooding, the red lines here show the streets that would be flooded in the most severe flood, the 1 in 1,000 chance flood. Roads affected could include Bennington Street, Leverett Avenue, and Lawn Avenue. Let's take a look now at how 9 inches of sea level rise affects flood risk. This amount of sea level rise is projected by 2030. With 9 inches of sea level rise, the same flood entry pathways that you saw before still remain, shown here in lighter colored arrows. New flood entry points shown as darker red arrows, emerge with the increased sea level, including along Belle Isle Marsh, Constitution Beach, and from Chelsea Creek between Boardman Street and Addison Street. Here is how the risk of flooding from the storm types we looked at earlier changes with 9 inches of sea level rise. First, the severe winter storms or nor'easters are likely to cause more rare floods on a more regular basis, affecting familiar places like the area around Noyes Playground, Maverick Mills, and Belle Isle Marsh. More flooding is possible coming in from Revere. An event of this type is expected to impact a few residents. Second, the more severe winter storm expands further into the neighborhood, including many areas of Brandywine Village, parts of the MBTA rail yard, and more areas along Chelsea Creek. Also, areas north of Orient Heights, along Tomasello Way. An event of this type is expected to impact about 2,300 residents. Third, an even more intense storm would continue to expand risks slightly further inland. An event of this type is expected to impact about 2,400 residents. Red lines highlight roads that could be flooded. More stretches of Bennington Street would become at risk, along with Layden Street, Boardman Street, Brandywine Drive, Constitution Beach parking, and stretches of Saratoga Street. Areas along the Greenway are affected through a flood pathway that was within the Phase 1 study area. Addressing this flood pathway would reduce the risk of flooding to roads in the area between Wood Island and Airport MBTA stations. Now let's fast forward to when seas have risen 40 inches. That's currently projected to be at least 50 years from now, by the year 2070. New flood entry points, those darker red arrows, continue to emerge around the edges of East Boston, including from Constitution Beach, Belle Isle Marsh, and Chelsea Creek. Here's what flooding from those various entry points could look like in those same storm types. With 40 inches of sea level rise, the effects are much more widespread. First, severe winter storms or nor'easters would affect almost all lower-lying areas around Orient Heights, east of Addison and Wordsworth Street, including Suffolk Downs, as well as areas along Chelsea Creek and Wood Island Bay Edge Park. An event of this type is expected to impact about 3,900 residents. Second, the more severe winter storm would bring flooding slightly further inland, expanding along Chelsea Creek and Eagle Hill. An event of this type is expected to impact about 4,400 residents. And third, an even more intense storm would affect a slightly larger area. An event of this type is expected to impact about 5,000 residents. It is important to note that this risk is not today's risk, but tomorrow's long-term risk by the year 2070. While the amount of flooding may be scary, we also have time to plan for and adapt to it. This is why we are developing solutions today. The effects to roads would be extensive with any of these storms. Orient Heights would be cut off from the central and southern parts of East Boston, and from Revere to the north. The neighborhood along Sarasota Street near the MBTA rail yard would likewise be isolated. You've seen now where flooding could occur now and in the future. You may be wondering, how deep would the water be? Let's take a closer look at two areas in the neighborhood. First, along Chelsea Creek near the 1A Addison Street intersection, just east of the Chelsea Street Bridge. You're now looking along the water's edge of Chelsea Creek along Highway 1A. The western edge of the Maverick Mills building is visible on the right. Today, flooding does not extend beyond the riprap. With 9 inches of sea level rise, depths could increase to about 6 inches during an extreme storm event. With 40 inches of sea level rise, depths would be in the range of about a foot to just over 3 feet. Secondly, we'll take a look at the waterfront along Constitution Beach in those same storm types. Today, flooding does not extend beyond the beach. With 9 inches of sea level rise, it starts to creep up slightly inland. With 40 inches of sea level rise, the effects are much more significant. Flooding would move beyond the beach, with flood depths of the adjacent amenities and parking lots ranging from about 1.5 feet to just over 4 feet. As you can see, coastal flooding is a serious threat. Our communities are at risk now, and due to climate change, the risks will only increase in the future. But the good news is that we have time to design solutions and take action to help protect East Boston and Boston as a whole. We hope that improvements to reduce the risk of flooding can also contribute to a better waterfront for your neighborhood. But we can't do this alone. Please join us and contribute to developing solutions to protect your neighborhood. Find out how you can get involved by visiting the project website. Thanks.